Elon has 40,000 vehicles. At least it could be as high as 60,000 vehicles that have been produced of the Model Y in China. And those vehicles are not accounted for in sales for Q4 of 2020. So we believe this is an explosive development that will affect the stock price of Tesla greatly. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. We want to thank our Patreon supporters. Your support means the channel is viable, works, and can serve everyone considered, and would appreciate your considering joining us. We also want to thank you if you take time to like and subscribe. So today is a great day actually for Tesla. This is Monday, the 5th or the 4th of January 2021. Today's show is kind of focused on what I want to call some obvious numbers and some not so obvious numbers for Tesla. Just a reminder, please like and subscribe, and constructive comments are always appreciated. So what kind of happened is sort of a three-pronged research component. So it's more like four prongs. So what happened is that in September of this year, there were images of the Model Y test vehicles that were coming off the line in Shanghai, China. So what then happened was that there were a series of approvals that occurred, let's say the beginning of October, the beginning of November. And those approvals included initially permission to sort of obviously build a factory, but the next stage was permission to build vehicles, particularly test vehicles, but there was actually no permission to start sales of those vehicles from the Model Y standpoint until the beginning of this year, or January. So we've been informed that as of the 1st of January, sales have begun for the new Model Y built in China. We just got the pricing of that vehicle as well, and we had a large backlog of buyers prior, but that backlog increased as the actual price point was known on the vehicle. So it's our assessment we're in that 200,000 to 300,000 vehicle reserve zone for the made in China Model Y. So an interesting problem occurred, and we were really disappointed to hear about the delay by the Chinese government. And the interesting problem was that all of a sudden you have an interesting circumstance where China will allow you to build vehicles, but you're not allowed to sell them. So this very interesting situation emerged, which is if the vehicle is built but not sold, it counts against your cost of goods sold because you had to put the money into building it, but you can't count the revenue because your customers haven't taken delivery yet. So I think this is a very interesting situation, because what we thought would occur is Elon would delay the build of these vehicles until starting January 1. That way, as they were being built, they could be shipped out and sold. What actually ended up happening is that Elon decided to start producing sometime in November, we believe. And in theory, they were ready to go first or second week of November. But by December 18th of 2020, it was announced by Elon that production was happening on the Model Y. So again, what he pointed out on December 18th was they were doing production. He did not say that they were doing sales. So it's our assessment what occurred is that Elon decided to go ahead and stockpile cars in storage. And then as soon as sales were approved or as agreed by the Chinese, they could just deliver those vehicles rather than having to produce them as well. So in our estimation, if you estimate 5,000 vehicles a week and you have 8 weeks, that's about 40,000 vehicles that have been produced already. This is kind of a big deal because the Chinese New Year holiday, I believe, hits starting the end of this week, and it lasts for at least a week. It might be 2. So that might have affected how many vehicles that facility could produce as well. And during this period, you have workers, for example, at a Tesla would be living in the dorms, and this would be the period where they get to get on trains or however they travel to get back to their home visitation prior to coming back to work. So it's more like a 10-day break that these workers get. And obviously, having to produce now as we get into this break would create a challenge. So the interesting element that I believe here is that we believe that what's going to happen is that there's going to be a process where analysts have to start figuring out how many vehicles Tesla will produce and sell for the quarter. And it's interesting because if you've already built and sold, let's say 40 to 60,000 vehicles, and it's only the second day of the quarter, you now have a sign that Tesla's getting a head start on having a very big year in terms of production and sales. So our assessment of this entire thing is that once everybody gets wind of how many cars were produced and the fact that the buyers have already put up their deposits, in many cases paid for the vehicle if their delivery times are close, we actually think that this is an amazing circumstance because I don't know how you're going to handle the accounting of it, but Tesla has enough cash on the balance sheet to pay suppliers so that they could produce for a couple of months and not have any issues there. But I think it's an excellent use of the cash that's on the balance sheet currently to sort of fund this process. Another element of this that I found interesting is how do you handle the accounting for that? Because usually what people do is they wait to build and sell as quickly as possible in a just-in-time fashion. The Chinese government rules called for an execution process consistent with what we just described. So one of the things you'll notice in the photos that we have both on the front page, front of the show, as well as photos we're going to put into this show, is that as you look, you'll notice that the Model 3s that are ready to go and be shipped to customers for delivery at stores all have no coverings over them. The Model Ys, particularly the white Model Ys, you'll notice have plastic covering over the top because the Shanghai salt air for an extended period could damage the paint, particularly vehicles that have just been produced. So another component of this is Mr. Yang, I believe, who actually did the overhead drone footage here, indicated that the number of vehicles post-production and storage has a greater number of Model Ys than Model 3s. So this could go one of two ways. Number one, it could go the direction of saying, hey, Elon said as of December 18th, they were already in production, but he didn't say how long they'd been in production. So again, in theory, it could have been just 4 weeks of production, which works out to 20,000 cars, or we believe it's a greater than 4 week, more like 6 to 8 weeks amount of production that's gone on, which gives us that higher number. So the point I want to make here is that there's no doubt that the number of vehicles produced by Tesla in the quarter, but maybe not acknowledged because they weren't delivered, is far greater than the numbers that were provided. So what happens from an analyst standpoint is if you know vehicles are being produced and delivered and you can track that count, that starts to affect a sense of the growth rate of the company and its profitability, and all of that has to be baked in. This is also an interesting move by Elon because it solves the problem of delay by the Chinese government in allowing them to build. The issue, though, is it introduces another example of why it is that a lot of people trying to get their arms around Tesla analytics or analysis are kind of stuck. How do you calculate everything the company is doing if you get surprised by things like, oh, guess what? Those 40,000, let's say, vehicles, and it could be 50 or 60K, we're calling it 40 because it's kind of in the middle. If that plant is full bore at 10,000 a week, you see that that number could be very high. So what we're kind of getting at here is that it'll be very easy for Tesla to exceed its numbers from last year, particularly because there was no Model Y involved. But what if you have an extra 50 to 80,000 vehicles you're able to produce just because you started early on production, even though you weren't able to sell those vehicles right away. So what I see happening here is that there are a lot of analysts who currently have to go back and analyze the production numbers as well as details like this. And I really think that as you look at the market dropping 400 points and the NASDAQ down 200, one of the reasons we believe that Tesla stock price is up today in a very down market is there's new developments happening that are significantly going to affect sales and profitability of the company. And there are a lot of people that can see those numbers that understand how the analysts are going to have to respond to Tesla, the Tesla story or the Tesla narrative in a different way. So I guess I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I picked 40,000 as a number because, there are some extra days of production there. Think about it. There are 31 days in December. So if they were producing all the business days for the month, there's more than 4 weeks of production that occurred. So if we're talking, 7,000 vehicles a week, maybe 10,000 vehicles a week, you can see how these numbers can actually get very large. So 2 months at 10,000 vehicles is 80,000 vehicles produced. So I'm throwing around numbers that are possibility. I think the worst case scenario is 20 to 30,000 vehicles produced in the production thus far by Tesla that are ready to sell as of the 1st. But those are now heading out to customers. And now as we get into the new year, the new production that's going on allows them to start building some very significant numbers of vehicles that can be sold globally, if not in China. And based on the demand numbers that we've heard about in China, we think that there is at least 250,000 vehicles worth of sales in China before there's any consideration for shipping vehicles out of the country. So what does this sort of all suggest? Basically, it suggests that Tesla's doing great. The numbers are great. The two components of evaluation are, number one, how did the company do last quarter? So that's solid. We're at the 500,000, 180,000 vehicles delivered. But the next question is, how's the company doing relative to growth rate and demonstrating how they're going to deliver that growth into the subsequent quarters? And I believe that when you look at this jumpstart that Elon has done with the secret vehicles, we now have an interesting situation. By the way, the reason we call it secret vehicles is if you look at the numbers from last quarter, Elon, the official numbers were 510,000 vehicles produced and 499,500 were actually delivered. What they didn't talk about was how many vehicles did you guys produce in China during December or a period prior to that? And how are those deliveries going with the Chinese? I don't expect Elon to answer that question. I just expect him to answer it in the form of large numbers of vehicles sold for this period. And I think this is very exciting because it's like, whoa, I thought that Elon had gotten jammed by the Chinese because they weren't able to produce and deliver vehicles in November and December that would have helped all their numbers. But he found a creative way to circumvent the slowdown that the Chinese government was inflicting and still get a lot of vehicles produced and ready to be sold. And I think this is totally awesome. I do think it violates kind of a trust agreement with the Chinese because I believe that the reason they slowed it down was a way to give domestic manufacturers an opportunity to try to catch up to Tesla before they got hit with the large number of Tesla vehicles being produced in this fashion. So we really look forward to your comments on this. I think it's exciting because that sort of early push of sales and vehicles pushes us into a zone where the Tesla growth rate reflected in the stock price will have to be higher than what everybody expected. So do not be surprised based on how this is going to play out, that as we get to the 3-day rule, a large number of analysts give Tesla an upgrade reflective of these numbers that were already pushed out and how already achievement numbers for the quarter, it'll be very easy to exceed. So if the expectation for the next quarter is, let's say, 200,000 vehicles, and China before the quarter starts has built 50 to 75,000 vehicles, let's say, I raised the number a little bit there. it'll be very easy for the company to achieve Q4 numbers. But now we're starting to talk about very big numbers, particularly out of China, pushing our quarterly production possibly into the 250 zone if you add Fremont in and what's going on also in China. So again, faster growth for Tesla, more vehicles out there, more profitability in the process, and circumventing the challenge of the Chinese slowdown, I think is very, very impressive. So we'll see if there's another obstacle, like we're not allowing you to register then pop up, but it looks very, very good for Tesla. And I feel like it's one of the components of why the stock price is doing well today. So just a reminder, please take time to like and subscribe. Patreon support is also greatly appreciated. At this segment, we typically enter our health tips. Don't forget, 25 legless per leg on a daily basis strengthens quad muscles, reduces the chance of knee issues. Also wanted to encourage you, if you're going to do lovemaking, very small salad prior will give you a lot more energy, because blood flow to your stomach for a large meal slows all the other blood flow aspects to your body. Something to consider. The third thing is, don't forget, no more than once a week fried foods. Also wanted to encourage you to consider a 5-2 or some other diet that might be helpful in your sort of health processes. Any rate, this is Greg once again for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss German, au revoir French, lehitro Hebrew, hoda hafez Farsi, zdravstvuyte Russian, ni hao ma Chinese, konbanwa Japanese, heido Swedish, e bueno, e la vita Italian. And in Jamaica we say, enough respect, walk good. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. Bye for now. And we look forward to your constructive comments based on this show.